What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to the Eastern Star Church, where Jesus is exalted and the Word is explained. Typically, we have our debrief on Wednesday nights, but we've had some technical difficulties, and so you're getting it today. And we didn't want to allow the technical difficulties to get in the way of you hearing the Word of God as we continue to chew on the message from this past Sunday. And we want to be able to continue to push the conversation about the kingdom of God as we look from this past Sunday's message, and as we do every Wednesday as we debrief. If you haven't already, continue to like our page, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and tune into our podcast as we continue to get God's word out to you the best we know how. And make sure that you share this with your family and friends. And we are grateful for your continued support and generosity during these troubling times in which we live, of course, as we deal with the health pandemic of COVID-19, but then also the pandemic that African Americans and Black folks have been experiencing since 1619. And as I heard one person call it COVID 1619. That is the pandemic of racism and injustice. And as you can see, I'm not by myself, but I have my peers with me, my friends, my brother and my sister. I have Mary Davis, and I also have with me Anthony Murdock II. So grateful to have you all on. Thank you for hanging out with me on today.
Thank you for that.
Thank you,
brother.
All right, man, we're going to hop right into it. As we know, Sunday's message was very timely. Considering all that is going on in our world, in our city, especially in our community, and especially in this nation. So Pastor Johnson dealt with a sermon as he entitled, "It's a Matter of Life and Death." Looking at Matthew chapter 2, verse 16 and 19, as Jesus was dealing with the injustices of his day, and looked at how his family, specifically his stepfather Joseph, was able to maneuver through all that was going on. Mary, I want to start with you, and we'll kind of work our way around. But I just want to start the conversation off by asking, what was your one takeaway from Sunday's message?
Yeah, so for me, it was really like twofold, really, in thinking about making noise, that we have to make noise, but also coupling that just with the fact of this is nothing new. You just mentioned 1619 and how long we have been going through opposition as a race, as a whole. So those are really kind of the combination, I guess you could say, of my big takeaways, and how we can no longer, many of us are guilty of being in a position to where we have come to a place of accepting the way that things have been, and we get too comfortable with that. And it's a wake-up call if there has never been one before.
Yeah. What about you, Brother Murdock? What was your takeaway from Sunday's message?
No, for sure. Definitely want to co-sign, ditto, exactly what Mary said. But I think my one takeaway from Sunday's message, amongst the many, was that it's in the DNA of this country to annihilate and eliminate. And we know those are words that in the Bible they're used to describe the work of the devil, to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And I don't think that Pastor Johnson used those two words of annihilate and eliminate on accident. I thought that was very intentional. And I think that as we work towards becoming a better body and better members of that body, and understanding the spiritual warfare that we fight, the sin that we fight spiritually, there's a sin that this country commits on the regular as well, at individual and systematic levels, and that being racism 20 and white supremacy. And so when I think about the number of things that Pastor Johnson mentioned, I think my biggest takeaway was the fact that he openly admitted to the fact that the DNA of this country in it is elimination and annihilation.
Yes, definitely. And we'll get into all of that tonight. But I want to start with the context that he laid out, because as we know, it's important when it comes to understanding Scripture, the context in which it was written. The story, specifically looking at Jesus being born the King of the Jews, and how there was a insecure king in King Herod who put in policies and the system in place to take out, well, his goal was to take out Jesus, but in his trying to do that, he literally took out all the boys, Hebrew boys, 2 years and under, in that community, in that city, in that region. And so to hear that context being laid out, of course, the insecure head of state, the unjust justice system that was in full effect in that time, the attack on the specific demographic of Hebrew boys, and then of course how he went about that. And I want to throw another piece in the context because I think it's very important. And I know Pastor, he only has a limited time to kind of deal with it, which is why conversations in sessions like the debrief is so important. The whole idea of the fact that King Herod was a Jew. He was a Jewish man. And so he was in partnership with the Roman Empire. So now we have a Jewish individual he has one of the highest positions in the land as a Jew, in bed, if you will, with the Roman Empire, and using his position to not look out for his people, but to attack his own people. And so when we look at the parallel as to that context and dealing with, what we see in today's time in American context, specifically here in Indianapolis with, the officers that have just been released in dealing with the Drayshawn Reed incident. And we see the two police officers that they released were Black men, African-American men who had a hand in not just killing Drayshawn Reed, but then the comments that were mentioned about the closed casket. We see that the color of skin doesn't necessarily matter when it comes to, the destruction, the annihilation of the people. And so King Herod, this Jewish individual connecting with the Roman Empire, now is taking out his own people. Brother Murdock, I want to ask your thoughts on that. When you kind of look at the context in detail, and we see even today where we have Black men and women in high places, not necessarily to protect their community, is more so of symbolism as opposed to putting policies in place to protect them. What are your thoughts on that?
I got a lot of thoughts on that, but I'm gonna limit my commentary to allow the sister to also articulate her perspective. But I'm gonna touch on two things you said, Doc. The first thing that you mentioned about the recent releasing of the officers' names and identities. What I'll say to that is all skin folk and kinfolk.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of depth to that, especially when we localize that statement to the city of Indianapolis. And again, I'm not going to veer off to talk about something not related to this text. But what I will say is there's power in peer mentorship. And there's a need for us as folks within our own communities to find people who believe and validate your identity. Because all skin folk are not kinfolk. And simply looking for folks who look like you don't mean they're looking out for you. And it's a trick of the enemy to make us think that everybody who looks like us is rooting for us. It's a truth that I continue to learn the hard way. I'll be open and honest about that. My vulnerabilities as a Black man oftentimes come with trusting other young Black men, and even not young, older Black men who should offer me the mentorship that I seek to progress at higher levels. But that I'm finding the older I get is less and less common. And again, that's not something I am going to be upset about because the text talks about it. What I will say, though, is there's power in peer mentorship. And so I'm thankful for relationships with folks like you, brother, who are a quote-unquote a peer of mine. You're closer in age than a lot of these other brothers in positions of power, but you continue to invest into me and my growth. So that's the first thing I'll say. All skin folk ain't kinfolk, but that's why there's power in peer mentorship. The second thing I'll say, to go back to the insecure king point, the idea of this insecure king using a military police to kill baby Black kings. What I'll say is this, Doc. And again, Miss Mary, I'm not going to go that deep because I know you're going to do your thing. But I'm going to say this right here. I loved what Pastor Johnson said. When you look at these young Black babies, you don't know who's going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist or a pastor, the next LeBron, the next whatever. We don't know. And the reason why we don't know is not because our babies have no potential, but it's because of the royalty that lives inside of their DNA. And I wholeheartedly co-sign that message right there. So those are kind of my two responses to your piece, Doc.
No, that's good. And I think you hit it right on the head. And I want to shift to this with Mary being the sister in the panel tonight, because a lot of times when we list the names of these individuals who've been killed by the military police, who've been killed in the police custody, a lot of times we miss out on the sisters' names. I know the focus Sunday was about the men that have been killed throughout history, but let us not forget the sisters who's also been a victim of police brutality, of the military police, of the unjust justice system. And so I want to make sure that we bring light to that, because I don't want to forget the women who've been affected by that. And so, Mary, as a Black sister, as a Black woman living in America, how important is it for us to remember those names, especially the sisters' names that we forget a lot of times?
Yeah, I believe that there's no measurement that we can even begin to put on how significant and how important it is. And when I think about that, I think just even historically of the impact that women have had as a civil rights movement in general, and being the support and the backbone of so much of what we have accomplished even today, when we look back. And so too often those names are either unwritten or they're forgotten. And so if we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter, we can't talk about Black Lives Matter without talking about all of the lives that encompass, and that's male as well as female. And so unfortunately, we have come into a place to where so much energy and focus has been placed on the men, and that's okay, but we have to place just amount, if not the same amount, as energy on women as well. Because, I think about your Breonna Taylors, again, forgotten and in the news and away so quick, but we have to continue to do our part to make sure that all lives matter when it comes down to the injustice system, and us being able to have these types of conversations on a regular basis. Because women, when I think about just even a short period of time, there have been so many women that have been victims of the very thing that we're talking about today, and the very thing that we're shedding light on. And we cannot be able to continue to move forward if we don't look at the picture as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, and when we take it even to the Black mothers, right, who've been a victim and may not necessarily physically lost their life, but a part of their life has been destroyed because of this system that continues to take out our people, a system that has been designed to do that. And so I think it's important that we list the names, right? We talk about Ahmaud Arbery, we talk about Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. Like I think it's important that we list these names out to remind ourselves and to remind those who did the crimes, what they did to us and what they did to those specific families. Brother Murdock, what do you think about calling these names out? Like, I mean, because do you think we are doing that? Is it important that we recall these names, or do you think we're kind of like, especially with the families, reliving the moment of them being destroyed and taken away from us?
See, now you're hitting on something, Doc. And I think what you're hitting on is the heart of the Black experience in this divided states of America. And it's that even we try and heal, we do so while in hell. And it's difficult to hear from the burn while it's still burning. And that's our predicament. That's why I think integration is the 4th degree burn. Because unlike the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree, those burns stop burning and you can heal. Now, while a 3rd degree burn might be worse than the 1st, you heal from that 3rd degree burn because that burn stops burning. But this burn of integration, constantly being required to assimilate into a culture that pisses on our spirit, constantly whitewashes our music, whitewashes our Jesus.
Yeah.
It's difficult to heal on that. And so you ask yourself, how do you process and heal from trauma while also calling things as they are?
Right.
That is difficult to do. And I think that's something that we have to acknowledge, and it's about how do we become more radical in describing our healing processes? How do we become more radical in defining self-care so that our ideal self-care doesn't come at the servitude of somebody else? But I think to answer your initial question, brother, it is important to call out the names. It's important to say her name and say his name and say their name and say Z's name. It's important from black men to black women to black trans and black gender non-conforming. It's important to say the names. You want to know why? And this is a provocative, but I believe one of the reasons we experience such tremendous anxiety in our community is because we can hear and feel the screeches of those soldiers' souls that are screeching, Doc. They're not silent. Just because they may have been shot with the silencer doesn't mean their souls are silent. And I can feel that spirit in my heart. I can hear it in my head, and it makes it difficult to sleep.
Yeah.
And so we experience some of this emotional, psychological turmoil and trauma because we can feel and hear those souls screeching. And when we say their names, we acknowledge that we can hear them. And we must continue to acknowledge that we hear those screeching souls because that's the least that we can do for them.
Yeah. I think I agree, man. And as we call out these names, it's also a reminder of the names that we don't know, right? The names that were lynched in the backwoods that we don't recognize, that we didn't get the news on, right? The names of those ancestors that jumped off the slave ship before even arriving to America. And so as we recall these names and remember those who really were victims of an unjust system, of an insecure head of state, and all of these different things, and which is why, as Pastor talked about and what Mary brought up earlier, the importance of making noise. And so he referenced that verse about Rachel making noise in Ramah, and how Ramah is a term that means a high place, but it was some low down dirty things going on in a high place, as we even recognize here in these yet to be United States of America, how there's so much money that's being made and all of these different things, educational opportunities, job opportunities, all these different things that are, great opportunities here in this country, but yet and still in 2020, they see black skin as a threat and as a weapon, which is why we need to make the noise. And he made that point about, the agitation versus the legislation. And so, Mary, you brought up this whole idea of making the noise. What about that point really stood out to you?
I think about just, Pastor talked about the sacrifice, that Rachel made. And if we think about all of the lives that have been impacted, all of the lives that have been lost, and even an extended family above and beyond who that we see in the news, who we see, on social media. So for me, it's one of those things where we cannot afford to allow for those that weren't able to have a voice during those moments. Like, this is our opportunity. This is our time to be able to have a voice for those lives that were sacrificed, and not being able to lose face, so that's what that is about for me, is not getting so comfortable with the pain to where we don't even act as a catalyst to ignite the change that we need in order to be able to have legislation move, so the agitate, I feel like if we're going to agitate, we got to agitate with purpose. We have to utilize these social movements to be able to put us in a position to where we're able to have a voice, to make noise, to get people to make change. Like, we have to be that very catalyst that we need in order to make that impact. So that noise, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but it has to come in so many different forms.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you hit on something when you talked about being comfortable with the injustice, and being comfortable with the violence, being comfortable with the fact that, people see our skin color as a threat, as a weapon. And it's easy to get comfortable because it happens so often. Right? Like, we've been in this whole COVID-19 pandemic for since March, and in like a span of a month, we had at least what we know on that made it to national news, at least 3 individuals, who was killed violently for no reason. And so to get that back to back to back, and then of course what's going on here locally, still trying to grieve from all these different things. It's easy to just be comfortable. It's easy to unplug and say, forget it, I ain't gonna keep up with all that's going on, to kind of protect your own, you know what I'm saying, mental health and your own spiritual health, which is very important. I mean, because this is the position that I'm in right now, the point where it's like, how do I stay disconnected, you know what I mean, to the point where I can keep my own spiritual well-being intact while at the same time being aware of what's going on, so that I can know. Because I mean, as I said before, like, to be Black in America is to be in a constant state of grief, where you're constantly grieving, right? And so for me personally, to keep it transparent, like, to lose a childhood friend, you know what I'm saying, to the virus, and then my wife loses her grandmother, and then we hear about Drayshawn Reed, then we hear about Ahmaud Arbery, then we hear about Breonna, then we hear about George. It's like, it's all together back to back in a constant state of grieving, while still trying to keep some form of sanity, which is why I think that making noise is important, in so many aspects, because it gives us an opportunity to express that frustration, to express that anger. Brother Murdock, what's your thoughts on that, man? I want to hear your thoughts on this whole agitation piece, but then also this balance of protecting your own spiritual well-being, your own mental well-being, protecting your heart, guarding your heart, as the scriptures say, but then at the same time, being aware of what's going on in your surroundings.
Man, dog, that's a power-packed question, brother. That's a power-packed question. And I'm not gonna lie to you, Doc, man, that's been hurting me. I can't lie to you, especially as someone who brand company is built upon that voice, right? Talking, teaching, and storytelling. Man, it is difficult. It is difficult for me to even get on social media, man, because, and again, you know what I'm saying? I was raised in a Black family, obviously, by a strong Black man, around strong Black men. And I was raised to be strong. And being strong in an environment that tries to suffocate and strangle you constantly, there's a lot of consequences to that. And go back to what Mary had said, the collateral consequences of the killing of Black bodies is incredible. So much so that when one dies, there's something that dies in everybody. And I'm not sure what other communities can deal with that in such a systematic way. It's not individual, it's systematic. And there's these constant reminders. And so to go to your one piece about this relationship between agitation and legislation, what I'll say is this, Doc. I definitely agree that soulful agitation, which is what we're doing right now, we ain't just yelling. I can't speak for the white folks who are co-opting the movement. I can't speak for the alt-right. I can't speak for the allies who are looking for a social media opportunity to become Twitter famous. I can't speak for that. But for the Black folks who are crying and are doing what you said, expressing their frustrations, I call that soulful agitation. And I definitely agree that that following soulful agitation, there must be strategic mobilization. However, brother, I think we must be intentional about what those mobilization efforts include. And we must remember that if legislation is what to follow agitation, we are assuming we have a particular objective for the end game. And no one is saying that end game is not right. We want greater representation. And not just descriptively, but substantively. I don't want folks that just look like me, because all skin folk ain't clink folk. I want my interests represented in these places and spaces of formal politics and government. So I don't disagree there. But we also must understand that our predicament is a product of a system that when it kills Black bodies, it's operating appropriately. And we must ask ourselves, to what extent can we continue to subjugate ourselves to that system, knowing the trauma that's associated? Yeah. And so what I say is, greater than agitation and legislation, we must have soulful agitation to strategic mobilization. And I make it a little bit broader than just legislation, because we must search for economic independence, in addition to spiritual independence, in addition to political and governmental representation, in addition to, and this is the piece that I just want to add my 2 cents about, the media. The media. We have got to have an intentional conversations about the power of the media.
Yeah.
Because what hashtag Black Lives Matter means as much as it did when those Black women made it. But the way the media works is we can have a day of action that we still don't know who organized it. And it causes people to post the hashtag, nobody knows what it means. And in result, in consequence, clouds actions for that very hashtag, speaking about those very same lives, not to be produced. We have got to be intentional about the role that the media plays in the normalization of violence against Black bodies, in the normalization of trauma porn on the social media screens of our young Black people, and the role that the media plays in negating opportunities for Black folks to see themselves outside of white supremacy.
Yeah.
So I agree, agitation must lead to legislation, but rather than legislation, it's got to be strategic mobilization, because you don't fight systems with bills. You fight systems with systems. And that comes with strategy, Doc. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and more and beyond, because that whole piece on media is definitely important as we try to tell our own story, right? And
Come
to
on, Doc.
reclaim our narrative in a way that is productive, in a way that is beneficial for our own community. Because even as the media is telling the story of the protesting and the agitation, they make it seem like everybody out there just to get free TVs. when we're out there to cause that agitation, to cause that discomfort for those who are passing those laws. And so I'm with you 100% on that. And I also want to talk about this because, a lot of times people, for those who are on the front lines as it relates to the agitation, they have a lot to say about those who are not out there protesting. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like we not in the middle of a pandemic. Like, we still in the middle of a pandemic. Half of those people ain't got no mask on. And people got kids that they try and go home to. So we ain't out there all the time protesting in the middle of the street. However, there are different ways in which people can make noise. There are different ways in which people can agitate. So Mary, when you talk about, the different ways in which people can protest and the different ways in which people can make noise, what goes on in your mind as it relates to how people can find their lane and their role in the midst of this fight?
So there's a couple of things. Use the platform that you have accessible, available to you, whatever that may be. It could be personal conversations. I can't tell you how many conversations that I've had personally to where we are discussing, what it is that's going on and being able to have a voice in that avenue. For me, also, it's picking up my pen. It's taking the time to write about it and being able to utilize a space in which I'm able to put that information out there. Social media, we all spend gobs and gobs of time, on social media. So why not utilize that space? We're at home, most of us, anyway. So great opportunity for us to be able to utilize that. So those are a few of the things in which I feel like from a perspective of that way, as far as personally is concerned. But the number one thing, Pastor mentioned it, and that's registration of vote. There is no higher importance that we can put to being able to make noise in the different ways in which we can than to have a voice in terms of who is in office. And that's not just, locally, but not just at the presidential level, but locally as well. We have to be able to have a voice and to get out there and to make noise at the polls, like it's necessary.
Yeah. Let's stay there for a second, Brother Murdock, because, we hear a lot of people talk about this idea of voting, and that voting doesn't work. And like you said, we need a system to change the system. What's your take on the whole voting piece as it relates to that being the ultimate form of making noise while at the same time having a hand in the legislation? Because to me, I mean, the very fact that, especially here in Marion County, where there was only like 20 voting polls open, when there was over 100 in Hamilton County, but we ain't gonna get on that. But this whole idea of voting suppression in the middle of a pandemic, you put thousands of people in one space at the same time. But what's your take on this idea of voting, the importance of it, and the argument that people feel like voting doesn't work.
Man, you put me in a jam right now, Pastor J.
Because I know a lot of our peers, especially at that young age, and we're, you know, in our age group, just have a distrust for the system so much so that they don't want to vote, while at the same time they talk about change. So how does one make a change without voting?
For sure, Doc. For sure. I'm gonna give you three things, bro. Three things. One, when we talk about the idea of making noise, you don't make noise in a room by yourself. That don't make any sense. You make noise to catch the attention of somebody else. Goes back to what we talked about. If we want agitation and legislation, it assumes a particular objective. When you want to legislate, you want to change the system in which we are operating. So if you want to change this system, the way this system works, the way this system works, we're not talking about making another one. If you want to change it, and I'm looking at the people on YouTube who's watching me, people who want to watch me on Facebook Live. If you want to change this system, the strategy must include the people who are hired, because a lot of these folks are getting paid, not gonna lie to you, but who more formally and officially are voted into these offices.
Yeah.
Because those voices, whether we like it or not, are able to make moves in the foreground and the background that impact our daily lives. And what I'll say also is this: before I get nervous about a tweet from y'all's president, I'm going to be more pressed about the decisions of my city county council. And you know what? Before the even city county council, do I have a neighborhood association? And if I don't, what do I need to do to organize it? That is a form of political mobilization we drastically underestimate. So the first piece about the legislation, that's the first thing. If we want to make change inside of this system, you cannot do it without political participation. Point blank, period. I'll go to the ends of the earth to argue that point about making change within this system. Yeah. Second point I'll make. And you know what? I'm not going to mention the third one because I'm going to tax my time. But the second point I'm going to make is this. Having a conversation with my bro. Not going to put his name out there because I ain't finna do all that. He voted for the first time in this election. And he called me. And he told me before he voted, he was voting for his first time. And man, I almost cried. Yeah. I said, wow. I mean, I literally almost cried. Got emotional. And he talked to me about the fact that, you know, he said, man, I'm going to go vote. I'm going to do it. But do you have any insights, you feel me, on like who I should vote for or why I should vote for them? And I told him this. I said, brother, the people who say that my vote doesn't matter are technically right. Because the president of this country right now did not get the majority of people's votes. The Electoral College escorted that man in. However, your vote doesn't matter when you have the wrong lens on why we vote. And you want to know why I vote? It's for two reasons. One, because Black folks were murdered, executed, lynched for me to cast that ballot. And I will be doing a grand disservice not to go and cast that ballot against their lives. I don't care how many white men continue to occupy those offices that don't give a hoot about the hue of my skin. That's been happening for 400 some odd years. But I do it to honor the Black bodies that were crucified for me to do so. That's the first thing. Second thing is that voting is a symbol. Prime example, I promise I'm done, Pastor Jay. When President Obama was elected, he didn't end racism when he was elected. He didn't end white supremacy when he was elected. He didn't stop voter suppression when he was elected. But the symbol of a Black man occupying the White House was a radical demonstration that contradicted the nature of the fabric of this country. To see Michelle Obama doing as only she can do in that White House was a radical demonstration. So when you go and vote in hopes that it makes these tangible, practical changes that will innately change how you experience whiteness, yes, you're going to feel like your vote does not matter. But your vote is a symbol. It is a symbol of a moment that you have the opportunity to participate in. And symbols in this country, in this context, mean more than many dollars. That symbol for that logo on this t-shirt, or that Nike check on your shoes, or those Adidas stripes will make you pay exorbitant amounts of money when there's a brother on your block that's selling his own t-shirts for $20. Because of the power of symbols. So they're my two pieces, bro. They're my two pieces, bro.
No, I mean, and you kind of led to the piece that I want to get to because, you know, and Pastor talked about we got to keep making noise. And he talked about we got to keep dreaming and listening to the angels as we are maneuvering through this pandemic of racism and injustice. And so this idea of dreaming, which I thought was very important because Joseph dreamed in Egypt, which is dope because, you know, they escaped this horrible situation into Black Africa, into Black Egypt, as we always talk about, because that was the best place to camouflage Jesus, right? To put this Black, dark-skinned young boy in a Black environment, Black community. And it's just crazy because, I mean, if we had time, we could talk about the Black flight in Black communities, but we ain't got time to deal with all that. But so he goes to Egypt, and while he's in Egypt, he's dreaming about his family. You know, he's dreaming about Jesus is in the midst of his dreams. And so I think it's important for us to continue to dream, especially as Black people in America. And we always go back to Dr. King and his dream, right? And the fact that although he dreamed this dream of, you know, his children not being judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, and how we still are experiencing the nightmare in which he talked about as well, which we don't really deal with that type. We don't deal with that Martin. We deal with the dreaming Martin. We don't deal with the fact that he thought that he was, you know, bringing his people into a burning house.
Come on, Jack.
But how do we dream in an environment that is taking out our young people? And we dream about, you know, Black businesses. We dreaming about bringing our community together. We dreaming about putting Black people in positions who have a heart for their own community. We have all of these dreams, and when we see, you know, situations like a George Floyd or like a Breonna Taylor, it's hard to imagine that our dreams will become a reality, you know, for the people that are coming behind us. Mary, how when you heard that point about, you know, dreaming, what's the point of dreaming when it seems like our people are constantly being killed by the system that we're in?
The point of it is because when we think about dreaming, we have to think about the legacy that will come as a result of that. You mentioned Dr. King. When I think about Dr. King, he had a dream that extended beyond his own immediate family. Right. It was about just the race as a whole. And so in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of everything that was going on, he still had a dream. And if it were not for his dreams and believing in something that was bigger than what it looked like in that moment, but rather what was possible, being able to overcome the opposition, being able to overcome those obstacles and the oppression that we face day in and day out to get to an end goal, it has to be bigger than us. So when you ask me about how do we dream, like, how can you not dream when we are in a situation like this? Because if we don't, we become complacent. We get stuck in where we are. We get comfortable, you know, and we don't make those moves that are necessary for us to have that systematic change, you know, being able to make the changes within the system, as my brother mentioned. So my question would be, how we can't afford not to. Yeah. We cannot afford not to dream, because it has to be about the legacy. It has to be about those that are coming after us and what we want to leave behind.
Yeah, I think that's super dope. And I think, like, I mean, looking back at our history, right, coming out of slavery, this era of Reconstruction, and how Black people had these great dreams. And then that's when we saw Black people kind of infiltrating the political system, becoming, you know what I'm saying, political officials. We saw Black churches, you know what I mean, owning newspapers and owning banks and all of these different things in the Black community. We see stuff like Black Wall Street and all of these different things that we had that kind of, you know, taking our dream and turning it into a reality. And then the system bombed that, right? And literally. And so, Brother Murdock, like, when you talk about that, and for you, I know it's very important for you to, invest in Black business, bringing Black folks together, where we cast our vote, but we're not depending on the system to meet our needs. How and kind of piggybacking off what Mary said, how important is it for you to dream, and how do you continue to keep that dream in the forefront when you see the negativity and the violence against your people?
Sheesh. I mean, you're speaking to my soul right now. And when you talked about Reconstruction, I got way too excited. And I'm not going to go too deep in that, but I'm going to say right now, I believe that we are in the midst of the second Reconstruction. When you do a socio-political analysis of what Reconstruction was after the codification of the 13th Amendment, the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, and the ceasing of the Civil War, and the response you just talked about, socially, politically, culturally, economically, of Black folks during that 14-year period, I see the same thing happening in this moment right now. Literally, if you do an analysis, I argue it down to the ground. So you were speaking to my soul when you mentioned that. But to your piece about the need to dream, and how do you dream while you're living in a nightmare, right? I think back to one of my favorite rappers ever, might be my favorite rapper, Meek Mill, right? And, his most favorite song is Dreams and Nightmares. And if you listen to the song intentionally, you don't just get hype off the beat, because the beat is fire. Mm-hmm. But if you listen to the lyrics, and he talks about existing in different spaces, from the back of a police car to driving an Aston Martin to a parking space that was simply too big. He's gone from being in the back of cars and not having enough space, with his hands behind his back, to driving in a car so big it doesn't fit in a parking space. That's the power of dreaming. This man has been on probation way too many times. And if he allowed his mind, and he's been incarcerated too many times, if he allowed his mind to be as incarcerated as the white man made him behind those bars, he could have never seen what he's doing now to get folks out on his platform.
Yeah.
So when you talk about why must we dream, I love what we can't afford not to dream. Yeah. We can't afford not to dream, because if we do, it remains comfortable. We aid in the normalization, and we aid in the comfortability and complacency that allows our bodies and minds to continue to be killed. However, I must give an action item, because it is easier said than done to dream during a nightmare. And that's why I believe that reading our stories is so important. Because when you know about people don't know about Black Wall Street, Pastor Jay. Yeah. Even if they do, they don't know about Reconstruction. They don't have the text. They don't have the context. And we both know what Dr. Freddie Haynes III said. A text without context is a pretext for conning people. And we will continue to con ourselves out of incredible opportunities if we don't know the context of our incredible moments in the past. We are sitting in the second Reconstruction. And how do you dream through the nightmare of the second Reconstruction? Remember the first. And don't make the same mistake. Integration is the fourth degree burn. We do not, I repeat, we do not have to continue to visualize ourselves inside of the context of white supremacy and whiteness. We have and can continue to exist outside of it, because my identity does not lie in a white man or what a white man thinks of me. My identity lies in a God that created me beautifully and wonderfully in his image. And the son that he gave to save my life looked just like me. So how stupid do you have to be to let someone that don't even look like the God we serve to determine how powerful you are? Come on, Pastor Jay. It wouldn't make no sense, man.
Help us, man. Hey, you brought up Freddie Haynes this past Sunday. He said, "Right on, King Jesus. No white man is going to hinder thee." Oh, he shouted me right there, Doc. But no, man. I mean, both of y'all owned to something, man. The power of the dream, man. And I feel like that's how our ancestors made it in the nightmare that they had to live through, and that's how we're going to continue to survive and thrive in this day and age. Continuing to dream, continuing to work for that dream, and to envision a better future, if not for ourselves and for the generation that's coming behind us. And man, this conversation has been so powerful. And I'm gonna kind of just skip over this last piece about this idea of listening to the angels, because I want to get to the practical piece. But that idea of listening to the angels, the point where he made about King Herod dying, and how the angel showed up and told Joseph to bring his family back into Bethlehem, back into Jerusalem. and this idea of angels and listening to the angels. Angels are really just messengers of God who has a word of God, who've been in the presence of God. And so I'm sure all of us can testify to the fact that we have gotten to the point where we are because of the angels that invested in us, the angels that guided us, the angels that looked out for us. But as we kind of conclude our discussion today, I want to ask both of you all, where do we grow from here? And I want to start with Mary. Where do we grow from here? We talked about, you know, the insecure king, the insecure head of state that created this system that was designed to take out a specific demographic. But in the midst of all of that, you know, we have to keep making noise. We have to keep dreaming. We got to keep listening to the angels, because it's a matter of life and death. So as we debrief this message, and we encourage people to go back and hear it, you know, on YouTube, the podcast, on Facebook, however you get the message, make sure you go back and listen to it. But Mary, where do we grow from here? We take all of this in. How do we apply this? Where do we grow from here?
You know, Murdock said something extremely important about reading the stories, you know, and for us, that awareness and how much we tend to underestimate that knowledge is power, and being able to insert ourselves every single day without feeling like, you know, you talked about being disconnected sometimes, and I get it. You know, sometimes you need to take a step back because you feel like it's so much, but there is so much power in being able to understand what is happening as well as what isn't happening. And when you can be able to be in a position to where you're knowledgeable enough to understand that, be able to make the noise after understanding what it is that's going on, the areas in which we do need to be a catalyst for that change, you know, like I mentioned earlier, and being able to support one another in those efforts. So where do we grow from here? For me, that's exactly what it's about. It's about using the platforms. It's about the awareness. It's about education. It's about being able to stand on the front lines and be able to have a voice, be a face, even sometimes for some of those that don't have that opportunity in that platform, and being able to make noise in the space in which we're at. So understanding those stories and being able to get on the front lines of it all.
Yeah, that's good. I like what you said about the platform, because a lot of people feel like because they don't have all the followers, or they don't have a platform, but all of us have influence over somebody. And so to utilize that and be a good steward over the people that God has placed in your life to be an influence, I think is definitely important. Brother Murdock, we talked about this sermon from this past Sunday. We take it in. Where do we grow from here?
For sure. Definitely want to co-sign everything that Mary said. Thought it was wise per usual. It's been a joy being on this call with you, my sister.
Likewise.
I got two things, bro. That's because two's a great number. Two's a fantastic number. I got two things. One, I love what Pastor Johnson said about that moth. I can't remember the name of the moth, but I love what he said about that moth. And he said that these moths, come on now, because we're going to go there. But I'm going to go there in a different kind of way. He said that moth will be born on a rock and they will die on the rock, right? And you know what, Pastor J, we too must do like Joseph and go back to our rock. Now, the rock that I speak about is three different kinds of rocks. One, lowercase R-O-C-K, like that moth that Pastor Johnson talked about. But there's a second rock, capital R-O-C-K. R-O-C-K means rebuilding our community for the kingdom. And we have got to go back to the roots of who we are. Eastern Star Church is doing work that nonprofit and for-profit organizations get millions and billions of dollars to do. And we do it through faithful stewardship and tithing. There is power in that. So we must go back to the rock, lowercase, like that moth, but go back to the rock of rebuilding our community for the kingdom. And lastly, then I got my second point. The last rock is capital R, lowercase O-C-K. You know those angels you talked about? Those angels, in my opinion, are the artists and the authors of our stories. That's who they are. We can hear the angels when we listen to our music and read those books. And something that, like you and Pastor Johnson always say, grandmama used to say, standing on the rock. Our salvation, standing on the rock. That rock, the rock of our salvation is what we come back to. That's what it must come back to. The same tenacity, the same confidence and conviction with which we talk about our blackness must be informed by our Christianity. Because Jesus was lynched on that cross. So much so, like those young black boys and girls, trans and gender non-conforming folks, lynched every single day on social media and throughout history. So that's the first piece, Doc. We got to go back to the rock. Here's the second piece, and I'm done. Pastor J, I loved it when Pastor Johnson said this. He said, when King Herod said, I'm going to kill all these baby black boys, he was saying they will not be great unless it's over my dead body. And you know what I asked to the people today, Pastor J? Whose dead body will we work over? Because God made it happen over King Herod's dead body. What needs to die for us to grow from him? That's it. That's all I got, Doc.
So you're going to leave us with a question. You ain't going to give us an answer. You're going to leave us with a question.
Hey, y'all know what I'm going to say. Listen. White supremacy must die.
Yeah, Doc.
That's what must die. White supremacy must die.
Yeah. Hey, there's nothing else to be said, man. You and Mary have said it all. There's nothing else to be debriefed. I encourage the people to go back and check out that sermon. It's a matter of life and death, because it is in the midst of this double pandemic that we are experiencing today. And we just want you all to continue to make noise, continue to agitate, use your platform, use the gifts that God has given you. Express that anger and that frustration in a way that is a protest, in a way that discomforts those who are in power. And then continue to dream, continue to envision yourself and your family experiencing a better life, even in the midst of this pandemic, this racial pandemic that we are continuing to experience. And then also continue to listen to the angels. And as Brother Murdock said, get back to the rock of your salvation, of the rock that is rebuilding our community for the kingdom. And I truly believe that God will continue to have his hand on our people, because as James Cone said,
come on, Doc,
God is on the side of the oppressed.
Come on, Doc.
We see that laid out as we talk about going back and looking at our history, right? We see that through slavery, through Reconstruction, through the lynching, through segregation, through police brutality, through mass incarceration, right? Through the racism in the healthcare system, all these different things. God continues to have his hand on Black people in this nation, and we praise God for that. And we praise God for you for tuning in to the Eastern Star Church, where Jesus is exalted and the word is explained. Continue to like our page, share it, subscribe. Continue to give to our ministry as we continue to do God's work, as Brother Murdock mentioned, rebuilding our community for the kingdom, giving food to hungry, clothes to naked people, shelter to those who need it, and as we continue to give God, spread God's kingdom and uplift Jesus in a way that will reach the entire world. We appreciate your generosity for that. And I appreciate Mary Davis and Anthony Murdock II for hanging out with your boy on tonight, despite of the technical difficulties. We were persistent in this tonight, and I appreciate y'all patience. Make sure y'all tune in Sunday, as always, for the Word of God, and then we'll be back next Wednesday as we debrief it. We'll see y'all next time. God bless. Peace out.